So let me tell you a little bit about Josh Stein. I'm going to do a bit of an introduction and then we'll turn the floor over to him. He's currently the Attorney General. He's been the Attorney General since January 2017. And he's running for re-election. He's on the ballot for this November. Prior to his election for the Attorney General's office, he was a member of the State Senate from 2008 to 2016. He resigned to run for Attorney General. While he was a legislator, he was Minority Whip, which indicates a fair amount of confidence in him by his colleagues. He earned a degree from Dartmouth College. I'm reading from Ballotopedia, Josh. Sorry, that's what I got. He got a master's in public policy and law from Harvard University. And Josh, I got a master's in public policy and law from Michigan.
Excellent.
About 6 years earlier. Josh worked as a campaign manager and deputy chief of staff for John Edwards. Now he's Attorney General. And Josh, we're so glad you're here. And the floor is now yours.
Well, wonderful, Richard. Thank you all very much for each of you sharing part of your evening with me to learn a little bit more about the important work that my colleagues and I have been doing at the Department of Justice. And then I hope we talk a little bit about politics and campaigns as well, since we are in one of the most momentous elections of our lifetimes, if not the most momentous. The world is upside down. We've been dealing with the gravest public health pandemic of our lifetime of 100 years, then the greatest unemployment and economic crisis since the Great Depression. And now we're adding on a reckoning of race and a history of inequitable treatment of Blacks by our government, whether it's healthcare, schools, the economy, housing, or criminal justice. And all of this has come to light in the wake of Mr. George Floyd's murder. And so all of this tumult is going on, and obviously it's affecting the work that we do at the Department of Justice. I want to talk first about race in the criminal justice system. Immediately after the murder, I reached out to the governor and asked if he wouldn't put together a task force on this issue, and he has, and asked me and Anita Earls, Associate North Carolina Supreme Court Justice Anita Earls, to co-chair the task force. And the governor's in the final stages of selecting its membership, and we're going to get to work soon. Our goal is to identify and implement, and I want to underscore the implement part of that, reforms that need to be made to the criminal justice process to promote racial equity, whether it's in the recruiting, training, practices, and accountability of law enforcement, or it involves the courts and pretrial release and fines and fees. And what do we need to do to make our criminal justice system fair? You know, the words on the face of the United States Supreme Court building is equal justice under law. And I don't think anyone in America believes that we lived up to that ideal at this moment, but we sure as hell need to try. And that's what this task force is about. And I will have a lot more to report on our efforts in the coming weeks and months. On the coronavirus, my office has been assisting the governor with the drafting of his executive orders. He decides what the policy is, and we help put it words to page. And then we've been defending his executive orders in court and had nearly universal success in doing so. Additionally, we're out there protecting consumers, which is a core function of the office. We've been going after price gougers. We sued an outfit in Charlotte, a towing company that was putting boots on trucks that had permission to park where they were. And the trucks were carrying medical supplies, food, water, cleaning supplies, products we desperately need in the stream of commerce. And they were being essentially held hostage for $3,000, $4,000, even $4,400. And we've gotten an order in the court at the early stages of our litigation, prohibiting the company from doing that. And that just builds on the price gouging work that my office has been doing, and a lot of work in Wilmington and southeastern North Carolina in the wake of the hurricanes, particularly against tree removal companies that were charging outrageous sums to people who were desperate to get a tree off of a roof or something. So price gouging, we've redoubled our efforts to do community education. We're seeing all manner of scams come up, people promising miracle cures, tests, ability to clean out your air ducts and eliminate all virus, masks, any kind of scam around the sickness you can imagine is an operation. And they're going after people's economic impact payments, the unemployment payments, the PPP business loans, anywhere where there's money to be had, the scammers are trying to steal it. And so we're doing all we can to help people protect their hard-earned money. We're also doing what we can do to help people who are struggling financially. I mentioned the unemployment. We have over 1 million North Carolinians who've lost their jobs, which is a truly mind-boggling number, absolutely unprecedented number. And those people are struggling. They need to put food on their table. They need to try to stay inside their house. They need to pay their electric bills. And so I've been working with the governor on his executive orders that will protect people from being foreclosed upon, evicted, have their water and gas and power disconnected. People need access to clean water. They need a roof over their head if we're asking them to wash their hands and shelter in place. So that kind of work. Just today, we have an initiative called the Carolina Relief Plan, where I'm recruiting financial institutions to work with their borrowers. And State Employees Credit Union, largest credit union in the state, one of the largest in the world, and Bank of America, largest bank in the state, have both been leading signatories. And basically, any of their customers, if they reach out to them, they can get at least a 90-day extension or a 90-day forbearance so that they don't have to make payments, and then a reasonable payment plan thereafter. And in that interim, in that 90-day period, neither Bank of America nor State Employees Credit Union will either foreclose nor repossess a car. So those are positive protections for financially struggling people. So that's the kind of work that we've been doing. Meanwhile, our normal work continues, trying to keep people safe from crime. I've been tackling the opioid epidemic, which has been very hard hit in Wilmington. We're trying to get a national resolution with the major drug companies, forcing them to pay billions of dollars to clean up the mess they created. I've sued Purdue Pharma and Insys Therapeutics, and I won't hesitate to sue the others if they do not act responsibly. Eliminating the backlog of untested sexual assault kits. There were more untested sexual assault kits in North Carolina sitting on the shelves of local law enforcement than any other state in the country, which is absolutely unacceptable, because each of those kits came from a person who experienced a terrible crime, terrible violation, and then willingly submitted hours of invasive examination to deliver evidence to the criminal justice system. And the system did nothing with that evidence, which is inexcusable. And so we are working hard to eliminate that backlog once and for all and ensure that it never develops in North Carolina again. On the consumer front, my litigation against Juul, protecting kids from the e-cigarette company, that continues. My work on robocalls, actually it's picked up because of the coronavirus scams, working very hard. We just brought an action against a robocaller in Texas that made something like 75 million calls into North Carolina to North Carolina phone customers. So that work continues. And then the environmental work, trying to make sure that the Cape Fear is clean, holding Chemours, the chemical company outside of Fayetteville, accountable, making sure that they eliminate all of their emissions either into the water or into the air, and secured a $200 million commitment from them to do that. And they're achieving that. Now we have to figure out, what do we do with all this Gen X that's in the river as it is? And that is a task that's squarely on my plate and one that I'm focused on. I also want to preserve the beautiful beaches in Wrightsville and Figure 8 and all along the Brunswick coast by prohibiting oil rigs off of our coast. And so I'm fighting with the Trump administration, which is trying to put oil rigs off of North Carolina shore. and put at jeopardy all of the billions of dollars of economic activity through tourism and fishing that we all depend on. So a lot of work to be done on the voting rights front. You know, I argued against the partisan gerrymandering, and it was the argument that we made in our brief that the court adopted, and now there are new maps throughout North Carolina giving us a fair shot at the legislature. All we have to do is pick up 4 seats in both chambers and we can get back in control. And then, of course, in the 2017, I withdrew a cert petition that Governor McCrory had filed before he left office, trying to reinstate the anti-voter law that targeted African Americans with, quote, almost surgical precision. And I pulled that back so that all those prohibitions would not be into effect, because we shouldn't be about discriminating. We should be about facilitating people's participation in our democracy. So this is some of the work we've been doing. I remain in court in the Supreme Court defending the Affordable Care Act. I'm in court opposing the Trump administration's weakening of the Clean Water Act, trying to fight his efforts to eliminate our government's most effective responses to the climate crisis, whether it's the Clean Power Plan or the Clean Car Standards. So we're working hard as we can to do what's right for the people of North Carolina. Of course, my ability to continue to do this is contingent on being reelected in November. You all may remember I won by a whopping 0.5 percentage point, 24,000 votes out of 5 million cast. It was an incredibly narrow victory. And that's just the way North Carolina is. And because of that, mine is the top targeted attorney general race in the country. There's a super PAC in Washington, D.C. that's dedicated to defeating Democratic AGs, including me. And they're coming at me talking about $15 million, which is an absolutely unprecedented sum of money. And it just means we have to work even harder to reach out to voters, make sure that we win this election in November. But, you know, I'm on the ballot. The governor's on the ballot. Joe Biden beating Trump is on the ballot. Cal Cunningham beating Tom Tillis is on the ballot. We have 3 Supreme Court justices on the ballot, a Court of Appeals judge, the entire state house, the entire state senate. The stakes of the election simply could not be higher. But in some ways, you folks in New Hanover and surrounding areas are privileged because you are a swing district. You are swing county. So your ability to send the right people to the state house, send people to the state senate, to elect Cal Cunningham, to elect the Supreme Court justices, to elect me, elect Cooper, and elect Joe Biden, you all have the ability to have a huge impact on the future, not only of North Carolina, but the entire country and frankly, the world. And so it's a great opportunity for us all to spend the next 5 months busting our butts to win in November. And thank you all for having me. You're on mute, Richard.
Thanks, Josh. I think the folks that you're looking at on your screen are really aware of our county's position in this election.
Yeah.
And they are determined to make a difference. And we've had grassroots efforts going on for months now, starting with precinct activities and
that's great.
You know, calling up people and encouraging them to apply for a vote by mail ballot. And that's ongoing. Of course, the coordinated campaigns here now, so we'll be working with them. But I want to congratulate you for, you know, your role in the partnership with Anita Earls to work on making our justice system more racially just. It's hard to name anything more important than that that's on our agenda now. And I hope you'll comment a little bit more about that. I mean, unless it's premature as you go along. Do you have anything to offer on that now? Because we have some questions teed up when you're ready.
Sure. Happy to hear whatever questions you all have. I mean, basically, the governor wants us to look at every stage of policing, from recruiting officers to training officers to the practices they use in carrying out their work and how we hold them accountable when they don't follow those practices. So there's a lot of things we can do in each one of those pieces. One thing that I've been doing is focusing on recruitment. You know, we want the best and brightest. We want public spirited people to go into law enforcement. There is the North Carolina Teaching Fellows. I'm sure many of you all have heard about that. It's a way to get really talented high school students commit to teaching, and then the state will pay for their college education if they teach for a few years. We've got the Criminal Justice Fellows Program, an idea that my office championed and got passed by the legislature that does exactly that. It will choose high school students. They will get 2 years of community college paid for by loan. And if they work in law enforcement for 4 years, that loan will be forgiven. And we want to get really good people into law enforcement. And then we have to train them. And my office helps oversee the sheriff training and standards and the criminal justice training and standards. And we're actively reviewing all of our training. We've already incorporated things like de-escalation and culturally appropriate policing. So we've been on these issues for a while, but of course we can always do better. And we're scouring the country to see what we need to incorporate on training.
That's great. So we have some questions lined up. The next question, we have two people behind the scenes that are helping us organize this. One is Lonnie Hashimoto, the other is Stephanie Fetzer. The next question is going to be presented by Lonnie. Lonnie, go ahead.
Hey there, Dennis Dixon. Do you have a question ready for us?
I do, yes.
All right.
Josh, good to see you again.
Hey, Dennis.
It's an amazing array of issues that you're focused on. So it's sort of amazing that anybody could be focused on such a wide array of issues at the same time.
Fortunately, I have 850 great colleagues. That helps.
Yes, but it depends on who's at the top. But I was going to ask you about one that you didn't mention, which I've asked you about in the past, and that is, what's the latest on money bail and the issues surrounding money bail?
I'm glad you asked, and that was actually the next thing I was going to talk about in the answer to the last question, but I figured I went on too long, so I would stop. But that's something we are going to look at with this task force, and it's something that my office has been working on for 2 years. North Carolina's law is actually decent. It says that no person shall be detained pre-trial with a financial condition unless they pose a risk to injure a witness, to injure anybody else, commit more crime, or flee. If an individual assessment and cannot answer any of those questions with yes, then they're supposed to be released pre-trial with no financial condition. But that is not the practice in North Carolina right now. And so I have been going around the state. We've held, I think, 5 different roundtables regionally across North Carolina where we bring together sheriffs, DAs, county managers, district court judges, magistrates, public defender, justice involved people, academics, all of us coming together and identifying what changes can we make to ensure that when we detain people after they've been arrested, but before they've been convicted, it's because of the risk they pose to society, not the size of their bank account. And we still have work to do in that regard. And to the extent we have changes that need to be made as a matter of policy or law, those will be things that the task force also picks up.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis.
I think next we have a question from Ellie. Ellie,
Hi, Attorney General Stein. My question goes back to your mention of the committee that you and Anita Earls are co-chairing. Did the governor set a kind of a timeline for when he expects recommendations, or is it just kind of go as you flow?
Both. He said that he wants a report by December 1st, but did not limit us to that. So that if we have ideas that we have consensus on as a task force early on, then there's no reason why we can't sort of do rolling recommendations, that as we deliberate and get consensus, we can announce them. And then we'll have some kind of wrap up summary document at the end.
Great, thank you.
All right, so I have a question now. So we have a thing going on in our county where the county commissioners kicked off a process which could result in the sale of New Hanover County Regional Medical Center. Josh, we fronted this to you, and we set up this call.
Mhm.
And we know that you have a role. So my question to you is really in two parts. One is, how do you view your role in the decision process regarding the sale of the hospital? And number two, and I will tell you, this is from the folks who are the organized opposition to the hospital sale. And they're all tonight at a county commission meeting. And so they submitted a question to me in writing that I agreed to submit to you. And it is about monopoly power. Mergers and acquisitions of big hospital operators are creating monopolistic environments and where prices go up, quality goes down, and jobs are being lost. Now, you are in charge of antitrust enforcement, as we understand it, in North Carolina.
Yes.
And the question is, what are you going to do about the problem of increasing monopoly power of hospitals, and specifically with this proposed merger? That's my question, and now it's yours.
Thank you. I do have antitrust enforcement authority. And so there was a proposed merger. It was actually not, it was pre-proposed. It was trial balloon of Carolinas Healthcare, which is now Atrium in Charlotte, acquiring UNC Healthcare and Chapel Hill. And they're actually, so UNC is predominantly around Chapel Hill, but there are other hospitals in different counties. And Carolinas is predominantly around Charlotte, but there were actually some markets in which they overlapped. And so there would be a consolidation from two providers to one. And for any antitrust enforcer, that's a grave concern. It also would have merged the largest and I think the third or fourth largest systems in North Carolina into one, which would have created issues around size and market dominance. And both of those were concerns of mine. I articulated those concerns. That transaction did not occur. Now, there has been a transaction very much akin to your situation, Asheville and Wilmington. Now, you all both already have shrunk from 2 to 1. In Asheville, it was Mission Hospital. In Wilmington, I forget what, it's New Hanover Medical, right? Isn't that the name of it? So you all no longer have competition. You are a sole provider. And that's a problem, but that's the situation. So antitrust does not really come into play in any transaction with Wilmington, because you're going to go from 1 to 1. It just depends on who owns it, the county or some other entity. And that was the same with Asheville, with their transaction. Now, Asheville was a nonprofit, and North Carolina has a law that says when you have nonprofit being acquired by a for-profit, that transaction has to give notice to my office. We have 30 days with which to review the transaction to ensure that the public's investment in the nonprofit is preserved. And that's what we did. The main questions we asked in Asheville were, did the company pay full price? When they bought the nonprofit and created this nonprofit foundation called Dogwood Health Trust, and we're going to put $1.5 billion in there, did that represent the fair market value of the transaction? We had our own independent analysis done using 3 different methodologies, each of which concluded it was a more than fair price. So I could not object on that basis. Additionally, there were elements of the transaction in which the for-profit HCA made commitments to the people of Western North Carolina about what it would do in terms of continued care, charity care, regional provision of care. There are a number of regional hospitals, like 5 or 6 outside of Asheville and smaller counties. What were their commitments? And I got them to substantially increase their commitments, to double the number of years that they would keep those hospitals open, to have more specificity about the types of medical services they would provide, all of which I said that if you do these things, I will not object to the transaction. And HCA did that. Transaction went forward. It's now about a year and a half consummated. And it remains a controversial transaction, but I got an independent monitor instituted who is overseeing the 15 commitments that HCA made to my office and to the Dogwood Health Trust, and we are aggressively enforcing HCA's commitments. My ability to intervene in Wilmington depends in large measure on who acquires it. If you have a nonprofit sale, even though it's controlled by the county, and it goes from a nonprofit to a nonprofit, then there's less of a role for my office to play than there is if the nonprofit is sold to a for-profit, in which case my review about the adequacy of the transaction comes into play, just like it did in Asheville. So my participation in any kind of review, obviously I would conduct an antitrust review. I will talk to my antitrust lawyers. I don't see how antitrust comes into play when you have already just a solo provider in Wilmington. You all have lost the competition battle as already. And then the second issue is, who is it who's doing the acquiring? What is the nature of the acquisition? Then that will affect what my office's review is. It's all very complicated, very technical, and for which I apologize. But my goal is to maximize whatever authority I have for the interests of the public to have quality health care. That's what I did in Asheville. Richard, you're still on mute. I can address some
I
of
got
the,
you. Yeah.
I can address some of the ones in the chat. Somebody asked about Mark Herring, a wonderful guy. He's the Attorney General of Virginia. And yes, we work together on interstate issues all the time. Just for instance, the opioid litigation that we're working on, that's one thing. The Clean Water Act, the protecting the coast from offshore drilling, all of these are issues I work very closely and very well with Mark Herring and all of our colleagues. Karen Dash asked about AT&T. I'm very happy that our consumer protection specialists were able to be of assistance to you, and I'm sorry that AT&T was being difficult before our intervention. I don't know that I would say that they are more emboldened, companies are, to do things that are consumer unfriendly. I just think some of them just do, they just do. And that's one reason why we're here and why we have consumer protection. And by the way, anybody who needs any help with any consumer issue, I'm gonna put our phone number in the chat. So if you have any consumer questions, just call that number and somebody can help you. The Confederate statues issue, I just actually sent a letter, I think it was to the mayor last week on Friday, I think, because obviously Raleigh's having the same issue as you all are. And there is a state law that's very restrictive on what local governments can do with Confederate memorials in their communities. And it's so poorly designed, this law. I mean, they should let you as a community decide who you honor in your public space. But because they don't, it forces the protesters, rather than go through the democratic process, to go and protest around the statue. And then that creates a public safety issue. And there is actually a public safety exception to this law, that if your chief of police or mayor or whomever determines that there's a public safety crisis, they can remove the statue. And that's exactly the legal basis with which Governor Cooper removed the 3 statues from the Capitol Square over the weekend in Raleigh. And then masks. The question is will Governor Cooper be mandating businesses to require masks of their employees or even their customers? And I don't know the answer to that question. The governor is constantly evaluating what is the state of the public health and what steps need to be taken to protect it. And I mean, what's clear is folks are wanting to get back to business, but they're not wanting to take steps to protect themselves. And I think any business out there that wants to require masks of their employees or their customers should absolutely do so, because it's this easiest thing for us to do if we're going to be out and about. So I don't know that the governor, when or if he's going to make a determination to require masks. Just wanted to make sure, Richard, that I got through those questions on the chat side.
I got that. Thank you. One more question about the antitrust issues. So what happens when these companies like New Hanover Regional Medical Center, which, as you observed, is a monopoly with respect to its customer base in our county and the nearby counties.
Yep.
But there's a whole nother dynamic that occurs when they hook up with a big company like Duke Hospital or HCA,
Yep.
where they have monopolistic pricing power versus the insurance companies. I think economists would call that monopsony power. Do you have the ability to address that question? Because that's really what's raised by this merger.
Yeah, maybe not really. I mean, New Hanover is not that big a system compared to these other systems. So if, let's say Duke were to acquire New Hanover, Duke would go from, it'd still be the second largest health system in the state. And yes, it would have more power to negotiate with the insurance companies that would otherwise, but it really wouldn't fundamentally change the market. I think even less so with HCA, since HCA only has one system in North Carolina, in Asheville. They're just not a huge player in North Carolina, and therefore I don't think that they would have monopsony power either. But it does matter who's buying them, and it matters what markets they come from, and is there any overlap in those markets. So these are all issues to be considered. But you all would be much better served if you had two health systems competing, and that would be the biggest thing that could drive down prices, as opposed to whoever owns New Hanover.
Okay, we have another question coming up, and I believe Lonnie has it.
Thanks, Richard. Glenn Savitz, I think you've got a question for Attorney General Stein on Bostock's effect. I can tell you're reading that in the chat too. So.
I am. I can just address it, or Glenn can ask it, whichever you'd like.
Well, given the Supreme Court's decision in Bostock last week about that discrimination based on sex includes discrimination based on being gay or lesbian, what the North Carolina state law, what the effect would be on that. And it seems like the North Carolina state law has the same language as Title VII with regard to discrimination. And then as a connecting thing, if the Democrats win the legislature, would you support a civil rights division that can actually process claims for discrimination in employment and work with the EEOC and have a work sharing agreement?
We, when I was in the state Senate, every term I introduced legislation that prohibited the state government from discriminating against people based on their gender identity or their sexuality. And so it brought me great joy that the Supreme Court interpreted Title VII to protect LGBTQ people. In fact, I was one of the parties of that litigation, and I was so happy that we won and that LGBTQ folks won. You know, they're the ones who've been out there fighting for generations for their rights. And so it is a great day. And there isn't always a lot of great news in recent months in politics. And so when there's something very positive, I think it's wonderful to embrace it. And so wonderful that exists. That law, obviously Title VII applies to North Carolina as well. It's a federal law, so it covers the whole country. So I think the limit is 15 employees. So any employer with 15 or more employees is subject to that requirement. Small businesses may not be. So I would be very supportive of the state reinforcing that and having our own laws that protect against discrimination on LGBTQ basis. And in terms of my office doing that work, it would be something I'm happy to look into. It's not anything that we have the resources to do now. At this point, I'm just trying to keep from having to lay off dozens of people because of threats from the Republican legislature. So I would love to be able to expand and start a civil rights bureau, but I'm trying to tread water, to be honest with you.
All right, thanks, Josh.
Thank you.
Stephanie has a question to introduce to you. I think the question comes from Leslie Cohen.
Yep, Leslie, you have a follow-up question to that?
Yes, I follow up on that same issue. So would that ruling affect the North Carolina State Health Plan, which currently excludes care for transgender issues?
I think that it may impact the courts. There's actually more, it's not directly, it's not a direct precedent relevant to that question, but it's certainly favorable, and I'm sure it will be cited by the plaintiffs. There are actually other circuit court decisions that have squarely taken this issue about discrimination in transgender care by state health plans. And so I think that is also influential. The treasurer is doing that litigation on his own. My office is not defending the treasurer's exclusion. And so that litigation is ongoing. I do think that Bostock will have an impact on state courts in the way they interpret things going forward, even if it's not directly binding precedent.
So
Somebody,
we have a
Marlene,
question that
Marlene asked about clean water in North Carolina, a huge nonpartisan issue. Hey, I'm all for clean water. I always fight for it at every opportunity. If you want to, the way I look at campaigns is, and polling, is that polling doesn't tell me what work I do. Polling just tells me what I talk about to the public, because I want to convince as many people as possible to support the good work that we've been doing. And if more people care about clean water than they care about protecting children from child sex abuse, then I'll talk about clean water. But if people care more about protecting kids from child sex abuse than clean water, I'll talk about protecting kids from child sex abuse. I'm going to do both. It doesn't change the work I do, but I choose to let the voters tell me what their priorities are, and then let them know about the good work we've been doing in that regard.
Okay, I think Ryan Ash wants to make a comment on behalf of Representative Holley.
But he's muted up there. Yeah.
Oh, sorry about that. We were hoping that Yvonne was going to be able to make it on, but as I mentioned earlier, we are unfortunately still in session, and with the Republicans in control of the State House, she does not want to miss anything. As I'm sure all of you remember, the 9/11, veto override that Deb Butler from down there in Wilmington had her, we will not yield moment. And that's what Yvonne's doing right now. She has made it very important that she finishes out her legislative role. Hopefully we're getting out by Saturday, and then I will tell you from the campaign manager point of view, it can't come soon enough. Like we've had to reschedule call time every single day. We constantly don't know what's going on. And then as Republicans do, they like to hide bad things in good bills and good things in bad bills to try and force us to vote for things. And unfortunately, we're coming from a place of being in the minority. Even though we are able to sustain Governor Cooper's veto, we're not able to pass meaningful, impactful progressive legislation. And so that is what she's been hoping for and fighting for, and she's going to continue to fight, until we are out of session, which, like I said, can't come soon enough. But to give you all just a little bit of background about Yvonne, since she's not able to get on, I'll kind of run through the bio. So she's been in the State House for 8 years now, first elected in 2012. You might hear my dog squeaking a toy in the background. Sorry, we have 3 people in the same house, all on video calls, so we have to find our own places. Anyway, So yeah, she has been in the State House for 8 years. Before that, she served as a state employee for 25 years. She has been a product of North Carolina's public schools. She was born and raised in Raleigh, North Carolina, went to Howard University, and from there then came back, like I said, worked for the state government before eventually retiring and running for State House. In the past 8 years as a state representative, her primary focus has been trying to combat the food desert issue. It's not an issue that I think is, before she came into the State House and really kind of made it her platform, there wasn't a big advocacy for it. And what she learned during that is that sometimes you have to reach across the aisle, and that is something she talks about every time that she gives her stump speech, is that, you know, she was able to draft this bill and build support for it on our side, but then eventually just had to give it to a Republican to run it across the line because we've been in such a minority with such a, you know, all the very gerrymandered districts. We don't have to mention New Hanover, where they still somehow managed to re-gerrymander those 2 state house districts. The one, Leslie, where I know you personally have been affected by it, and then Marsha Morgan and Adam Erickson running this year. And yeah, Yvonne was, you know, that's where she was. Now looking forward and what she can do, I think it's important to talk about the role of the lieutenant governor here in North Carolina. Because as the Attorney General just mentioned, we do have an opportunity to win back the state Senate and the State House. What I think a lot of people, I'll even admit, I personally didn't know it, the lieutenant governor can cast that tie-breaking vote in the state Senate. So if we end up with a 25 Democrats on the Senate side and 25 Republicans on the Senate side, her first vote is to remove Phil Berger from power. And I think that is by far the best talking point that I could ever use. Every time we talk to a donor, that's what we're going to bring up. And, you know, it works. It is, we've seen the drastic and extremely partisan nature that the state Senate has done and been in control of for 10 years. And so that's going to be her first vote. On top of that, they also, the role of the lieutenant governor has a seat on the state Board of Education, the State Board of Community Colleges, and the Military Affairs Board. And the last thing that, you know, like I said, I'm just trying to shove her stump speech into my own words, but the last thing that I think she really brings up is that North Carolina doesn't have a HUD. Like, you know, there is not someone in the Council of State whose primary focus is dealing with housing issues. And that's really where she's based her lieutenant governor's campaign on, is a program called the Ally Program. It's the Affordable Living Initiative. And what the touchstone of it is that there are pockets of communities across North Carolina who just simply haven't been heard from, and that don't have, you know, whether it's from gerrymandering or whether it's from just restricting voter access across the state, their voices aren't being heard. And so the same way she combated the issue of food insecurity and, you know, of food deserts, she wants to bring the same thing, talking about housing, and not just looking at it from like an affordable housing, you know, development in Raleigh or Charlotte, but also looking at how do we make affordable housing in rural North Carolina, where people are living in trailers that, you know, are 2 steps away from being condemned, where people are living paycheck to paycheck on, you know, not able to fix the houses that they live in, and they're not able to kind of upgrade their living situation. And so that's, you know, I'll go ahead and plug right now. You can go to YvonneLewisHolley.com and read more about her Ally Program. It is the first thing on the page. That is how proud of it she is. I am happy to answer any questions. I know I just kind of talked very quickly. I'm not as polished as our Attorney General on this, so I was trying to convey the same sense of candidacy.
We look forward to getting Yvonne on a call in the near future. And, you know, please help us make that happen. I think we only have a few moments of our Attorney General left. He said he was going to check out at 8. And so I'm going to make Josh the spotlight. And Josh, if you have any final comments before you check out, go for it.
I wanted to thank Ryan for his great comments. I actually was texting with Yvonne while he was talking, and she was apologizing to me and to everybody that she's stuck on the floor at the house, but that she looks forward to having another opportunity to visit with you all soon. And she will be just a stellar addition to the Council of State, and I cannot wait until she's victorious. It's just motivation. Look, the next 5 months, we have such an ability to impact the future of everything, of North Carolina, of the United States, of the world, and it requires our winning. And you folks are frankly privileged to live in New Hanover. You're privileged to live in New Hanover because it's one of the most beautiful spots on the earth, but you're also privileged because it's truly, it's a swing district, a swing county. It goes either way, and we need you all to go strong, strong blue. And I know that you have it in you, and we want to do everything we can to support your efforts, and we are grateful of your supporting ours and look forward to hard work over the next 5 months and victory in November.